Elara Mendez and Darren were the picture-perfect Malaysian couple, young, beautiful, and inseparable until a single night turned their love story into a national horror. Within 48 hours, Darren went from affectionate boyfriend to cold-blooded killer, staging one of the most chilling cover-ups Malaysia had ever seen. What began as a glamorous romance on social media would soon unravel into a nightmare of jealousy, obsession, and a desperate attempt to erase the truth that refused to stay buried. Elara Mendez was the kind of woman who drew attention without trying. Her warm smile, her effortless charm, and her love for travel had made her one of Malaysia's rising social media influencers. At just 26, she had turned her blog into a small empire, documenting hidden cafes, beaches, and luxury stays that followers dreamed of visiting. But behind those perfect pictures was a reality no one ever saw, a life tangled in quiet control, jealousy, and fear that slowly grew over time. Darren, her boyfriend, was seen by the world as her perfect match. He was handsome, polite, and owned a small tech startup that seemed successful from the outside. Together, they looked like a couple who had it all, young, ambitious, and deeply in love. Their photos told a story of happiness, and every post they shared was met with adoration from thousands of followers. Yet what appeared flawless online was only a mask covering something darker. Darren's business had been struggling for months. The stress of debt, combined with his obsession with image, began to affect his behavior. He became controlling, constantly checking Elara's phone and questioning her every move. What began as concern turned into surveillance. Elara, who once saw Darren as her biggest supporter, started to notice how his compliments were now replaced by criticism disguised as care. He hated when she traveled alone, and he always found reasons to be suspicious when she spent time with friends. To outsiders, Darren was charming, but to Elara, his charm had turned into something suffocating. She started keeping things to herself, small things like where she was going or who she was meeting. She began to smile through her exhaustion, hiding behind makeup and filters. Every photo became a lie, one she told herself as much as she told the world. She wanted to believe things could get better, that Darren's temper was temporary, that love could fix what control had broken. As March arrived, Elara planned a short solo trip to Langkawi to review a new eco-resort for her blog. She needed a break, a breath of air far from Darren's constant presence. But when she returned, everything changed. Darren found the photos she took alone, the captions she had written, and the messages from new business collaborators. To him, they were proof of betrayal. His ego couldn't handle the thought that Elara could live, even briefly, without him. That night, he stopped seeing her as a person and began seeing her as his possession slipping away. Their final photo together, posted just hours before it all ended, showed them laughing at a cafe. It would later become one of the most haunting images in Malaysian social media history, because no one knew that beneath that perfect smile, the countdown to horror had already begun, and within 48 hours, the illusion of the perfect couple would collapse into the country's most chilling true crime case. The night Elara returned to Darren's apartment in Cyberjaya was quiet, humid, and heavy with tension. It had been a long day for her, filled with travel fatigue and an uneasy feeling she couldn't quite name. She had ignored several of Darren's calls during her trip, and deep down, she knew he would be furious. When she stepped into the apartment, everything looked perfectly arranged, almost to clean. The kind of order that hides chaos. The air smelled of disinfectant, and Darren's calm voice greeted her with a strange stillness that felt more like a trap than a welcome. Hours passed, and neighbors later recalled faint sounds, muffled voices, something heavy falling, then silence. Around midnight, the lights in the apartment went out, and no one saw Elara again. What happened inside those walls over the next few minutes would remain one of the darkest mysteries. In the case, what investigators later pieced together told a story of rage erupting into irreversible violence. Darren's anger had reached a boiling point. In a storm of jealousy, he attacked her. The details were too brutal to describe, but the result was final. Elara was dead. Panic set in almost immediately. Darren stared at what he had done, frozen, then shifted into a cold mechanical state. Instead of calling for help, he started planning. His mind began to work like a machine, not thinking about what he lost, but about how to erase it. He dragged her body to the bathroom, wrapped it in a duvet, and began cleaning. He scrubbed every inch of the apartment, mopping floors and wiping surfaces with bleach. The sound of running water and plastic bags filled the early hours of the morning. At dawn, he opened her phone. He typed a few quick messages to her family and friends, pretending to be Elara. "I'm fine. Just need a few days off." The messages went out around 6 a.m. It was his attempt to buy time, to make it seem like she had simply disappeared by choice. Then he packed her things, her clothes, camera, and laptop, into separate bags and placed them in the trunk of her car. Security footage from the building would later show Darren struggling to drag something large, wrapped tightly, down the corridor toward the parking lot. His movements were clumsy but determined. At one point, he looked straight at the camera, his face pale and emotionless. That image became evidence later, but for now, no one suspected anything. He drove through the quiet streets of Cyberjaya as the city began to wake. The morning sun reflected off the windshield, hiding the terror inside the car. He spent the next hours driving aimlessly, trying to decide what to do next. When he finally returned home, the apartment was spotless, but the smell of bleach lingered. In his mind, he had contained the problem. No one would know. What Darren didn't realize was that every step he took that night, every wipe, every text, every camera glance, was building a trail that would expose him completely. The cover-up had already begun, and it would become the most chilling 48 hours of his life. The next 2 days became a twisted performance of normalcy for Darren. While the world around him continued in routine, cars passing, people laughing, phones ringing, he lived in a quiet storm of paranoia. Every sound from outside made his heart race. Every vibration of his phone felt like an alarm. But on the surface, he was calm. He posted a smiling photo of himself at a cafe with the caption, "Busy days, but grateful." To anyone scrolling, he looked like a man living an ordinary weekend. In reality, his mind was consumed by one thought: making sure no one ever found out what had happened inside that apartment. His first step was to get rid of Elara's body. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Darren carried the heavy suitcase down to the car park. The security guard barely noticed him. He was known in the building, always polite, always quiet. He loaded the suitcase into Elara's car and drove out of the city toward Genting Highlands, choosing a route with fewer toll cameras. The roads were winding, the mist thick, and the forest on both sides felt endless. At one point, he stopped near an abandoned construction site and pulled the suitcase out. It took all his strength to drag it into the tall grass. When he left it there, half buried beneath dirt and broken wood, he didn't look back. He believed that by leaving her body in that forgotten place, he could erase the evidence of his crime. On his way back, he stopped at a car wash and had the vehicle cleaned thoroughly. He wiped the steering wheel, the seats, even the door handles. He left her belongings, wallet, camera, makeup bag, in the trunk, thinking they would make the scene look like a robbery or a runaway. Then he parked the car near an empty lot outside Kuala Lumpur and took a bus home. He thought he was clever, that each small decision brought him closer to safety. Back in his apartment, Darren deleted every trace of Elara from his phone, photos, messages, videos. He even formatted her laptop and sold her camera online within hours. When police later checked his browsing history, they would find that he had searched for how long before a missing person is declared dead and how to track phone location after deleting a cloud. Every click revealed a man trying to outsmart the inevitable, but cracks were already forming in his plan. CCTV footage caught him on multiple routes that didn't match his claim of being home all weekend. GPS data from Elara's phone showed it moving in the exact direction of the construction site, before suddenly going offline. He didn't realize that cell towers never forget. By Sunday night, her family had already reported her missing, and police had started checking her last known contacts. As Darren sat in his spotless apartment, watching the sunset through half-closed blinds, he believed the worst was behind him. He had cleaned, hidden, deleted, and lied. But the 48-hour cover-up he thought was perfect had left invisible fingerprints everywhere. In cameras, data, and memories. It was only a matter of time before everything he tried to bury would rise back to the surface. 2 days after Elara's disappearance, the truth began to surface in the most unexpected way. Early one morning, a local jogger passing through a remote construction site near Genting Highlands caught a strange odor drifting through the air. He thought at first it was from a dead animal, but as he followed the smell, he noticed a half-buried suitcase near a pile of broken concrete. It was stained, heavy, and surrounded by flies. What he found inside would send shockwaves across Malaysia. The lifeless body of Elara Mendez, wrapped carefully in a floral bedsheet. The same design was later found in Darren's apartment. The horror of the discovery spread like wildfire, and the police quickly sealed off the area. Within hours, her identity was confirmed, and the investigation turned from a missing person case into a full-scale homicide. Investigators traced the case backward, starting from the evidence left at the scene. The suitcase contained fibers, hair strands, and partial fingerprints. The wrapping cloth had traces of cleaning chemicals, the same type sold in stores near Darren's home. Forensic experts began piecing together the timeline, cross-referencing traffic cameras and toll data. It didn't take long for Darren's name to resurface. He had been the last person to see Elara alive, and his version of events made less sense with every passing hour. When police visited his apartment, they found the place unnaturally clean. It smelled of bleach and disinfectant, but under ultraviolet light, faint stains appeared near the bathroom and the hallway. Investigators collected samples and sent them for testing. They also recovered a torn airline ticket from the trash, a one-way flight to Singapore scheduled for that same evening. Darren had been preparing to leave the country just hours after the suitcase was found. Meanwhile, digital evidence began to expose the cracks in his story. Elara's phone data, though deleted, showed its final location pinged near the exact spot where her body was discovered. Surveillance cameras caught Darren's car on that route, passing through toll stations at times he claimed he was asleep at home. His internet searches over the past week revealed an obsession with forensic cleaning, decomposition timelines, and police procedures for missing persons. By the time police brought him in for questioning, the case had already turned against him. He appeared calm, almost rehearsed, answering questions with short, emotionless sentences. But detectives noticed his cold demeanor, his steady breathing, his lack of surprise when they mentioned Elara's name. It was the behavior of a man who knew what they had found. As investigators worked overnight, more evidence surfaced. Darren's fingerprints matched the partial prints found on the suitcase handle. The bleach bottle in his kitchen contained traces of Elara's DNA. Every small piece, every careless mistake, formed a picture of a man who tried to hide a nightmare beneath a layer of normalcy. The story that had begun as a social media romance had now turned into a national tragedy. What Darren believed would stay buried had spoken through science, persistence, and time. The truth was no longer hidden, and soon, the mask he had worn so carefully would fall completely apart. When the confrontation finally came, Darren Shu sat in a cold interrogation room with the same blank expression he had carried since his arrest. The evidence lay in front of him: photographs of the suitcase, the bleach bottle, the highway footage, and Elara's final location ping. Every detail of his 48-hour cover-up had been reconstructed. The silence in the room was thick, the kind that crushes denial. When the lead investigator pushed forward the photo of Elara, Darren's composure cracked for the first time. His shoulders slumped and his breathing grew uneven. He didn't confess, but the truth was already written across his face. There was no more pretending. The perfect image he had fought to protect had disintegrated. News of the arrest spread across Malaysia within hours. Television stations replayed clips of the couple's smiling photos side by side, with the grim footage of police sealing off the construction site. Social media erupted in disbelief. People couldn't reconcile the cheerful man from Elara's travel posts with the murderer in handcuffs. Those who knew them personally struggled to speak. The contrast between perception and reality was so sharp it left the nation stunned. The case became a mirror reflecting the dark side of obsession, control, and image. During the trial, prosecutors presented an unbroken chain of evidence. The forensic experts detailed how Elara's blood traces had been found beneath a layer of fresh paint. In Darren's apartment, her DNA was on the suitcase zipper and inside the car trunk. Surveillance footage showed him disposing of the suitcase and returning to the city. In a different outfit, even his internet searches formed a timeline of intent. The defense tried to argue that it was an accident, a fight gone too far, but no one believed it. The meticulous cleaning, the calculated messages, and the planned flight proved otherwise. Darren's expression remained flat through most of the hearings, occasionally glancing at the courtroom doors as if expecting someone to rescue him from his own reality. When the verdict was read, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Darren was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. There was no reaction from him, no tears, no visible remorse. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't move. Outside the courthouse, Elara's parents stood holding a framed photo of their daughter. Her mother's eyes were empty, not with anger but with exhaustion, the kind that comes when grief has no more tears left to give. Months later, the apartment where the crime took place was vacated and left unoccupied. Neighbors said they still avoided walking past that door at night. Elara's foundation was launched soon after, dedicated to supporting women in controlling relationships. Her name became a symbol, a warning about love that turns possessive and the quiet red flags ignored in the name of devotion. In prison, Darren remained isolated, spending his days in silence, his once polished charm replaced by emptiness. The digital photos of their perfect love story still floated online, a haunting reminder of how easily lies can be framed as happiness. Behind every filtered picture and polished smile was the truth no camera could hide, that beneath perfection, there can exist a darkness waiting to break free.